Elder Ezra Taft Benson has been a member of the Council of the 12 since 1943. He has always been one of the great missionaries of the church and was just recently called to preside over the European mission with headquarters in Frankfurt, Germany. Prior to this calling, he formerly served as a mission president, also as a stake president. He has earned the distinction of serving as the Secretary of Agriculture in the cabinet of President Dwight D. Eisenhower from 1953 to 1961. While serving his country, community, and also his church, he met with prominent world leaders in many parts of the world, including Premier Nikita Khrushchev and Prime Minister Nehru of India. A member of the Boy Scout National Executive Board, he has been chairman of Region 12 for the past year and is the highest-ranking LDS Boy Scouter, having been awarded the Silver Buffalo and Silver Antelope Awards. Elder Benson is no stranger to us here at BYU, and that he has visited us many times before. He has traveled throughout the church, and his travels have endeared him to the hearts of thousands of members of the church throughout the world. I think that our attendance here this morning expresses to him our love and admiration, and we are united in this feeling this morning as we have the privilege and honor of hearing from Elder Ezra Taft Benson.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the faculty, and favored members of the student body, my beloved brethren and sisters, humbly and gratefully I stand before you this morning as I look into your faces, and with the echo of this lovely music in my heart, my soul is subdued and my feelings a bit tender. I pray that I may have strength to give to you this morning the message which I have prepared. To address you, of course, is a signal honor, a very great pleasure, and a challenging responsibility. My gratitude for this opportunity is increased by the realization that it may be several months, possibly years, before I have the privilege of coming to this campus again. I am grateful for the call which has come to me to again preside over the European mission, even though I leave my beloved country this time with greater anxiety for the future than ever before. Because of the nature of the message I bring to you this morning, I have committed most of it to writing. I shall speak to you frankly and honestly. Some of you may not agree fully with everything I say. Thank God, in this blessed land, we can still speak our convictions without fear. I have been in nations where this blessed privilege is no longer enjoyed. What I shall say are my personal convictions, born out of an active life which has taken me into 45 nations and brought me close to the insidious forces which would destroy our way of life in this choice land. I express these convictions and warnings today because of my love for you, the true Church of Christ, and our beloved country. I am not here to tickle your ears, to entertain you. I will talk to you as one who loves this great nation. The message I bring is not a happy one, but it is the truth. And time is always on the side of truth. Truth must be repeated again and again, because error is constantly being preached round about. We have been plunging headlong down the primrose path toward the inevitable destruction of our great country. It is quite true that while the socialist communist conspiracy of itself does not have as yet the power necessary to do the job, it is nevertheless receiving vital aid and comfort from the Fabian socialists, fellow travelers, dupes, and liberals to such a degree that the communists are jubilant at the course of events. In less than half a century, this evil system has gained control over 1/3 of mankind. It is steadily pursuing its vicious control over all the rest of the world. Since World War II, people have been brought under the communist yoke at the rate of more than 6,000 per hour, 144,000 per day, 52 million per year. Truly, the Fabian socialists in this country are rolling out the red carpet, which will without doubt, unless we arouse ourselves, eventually result in the complete communist takeover of America. This is their hope, their plan, and their bold prediction. This is not to say that all those lending their support to the Fabian socialist camp are consciously helping the communists. Undoubtedly, there are many well-meaning people who have been misled and confused. However, it makes little difference who pulls the trigger of a gun aimed at your heart. The end result is the same. There are real dangers ahead. Why do I have anxiety and fear for the future? I fear for the future when I realize that for some 30 years, our once free institutions, political, economic, educational, and social, have been drifting into the hands of those who favor the welfare state and who would centralize all power in the hands of the political apparatus in Washington. This enhancement of political power at the expense of individual rights, so often disguised as democracy or freedom or civil rights, is socialism, no matter what name tag it bears. I fear for the future when the federal government now owns more than 1/3 of the total land area within the boundaries of the 50 states. I fear for the future when the central government owns and operates more than 3,000 businesses and commercial activities in competition with its own private tax-paying citizens. I fear for the future when I realize that the functions of the federal government are carried on by some 2,000 major operating units. I fear for the future when the federal government directly lends $1 for every $5 loaned by private banks, and that much of the federal funds loaned are at rates below the cost of money to the government. I fear for the future when in 1913 to 15, a couple making $10,000 a year paid in federal taxes $60. But in 1956, a couple earning $10,000 paid $1,590 in federal income tax. I fear for the future when I realize that 25 years ago, the federal government received 1/4 of all the taxes collected in the United States. Today, the federal government collects not 1/4, but 68% of all our taxes. I fear for the future when the foreign governments have used and are using American tax money to pay for socialism. I fear for the future because 25 years ago, all taxes, federal, state, and local, took 14% of our national income. Today, taxes take 35%. I fear for the future when I see our federal debt soar well over $300 billion, over $7,000 per family of 4, 16 times the combined debt of the 50 states, and at the same time see no evidence that this dangerous trend will be curtailed. I fear for the future when I see an affluent but complacent citizenry paying little or no attention to these and many other socialistic trends in this blessed land of America. In 1878, the great Southern statesman Benjamin Hill of Georgia warned us of these dangers on the floor of the United States Senate in these prophetic words: "I dread nothing so much as the exercise of ungranted and doubtful powers by this government. It is, in my opinion, the danger of dangers to the future of this country. Let us be sure that we keep it always within its limits. If this great, ambitious, ever-growing corporation becomes aggressive, who shall check it? If it becomes wayward, who shall control it? If it becomes unjust, who shall trust it? As sentinels of the country's watchtower, I beseech you to watch and guard with sleepless dread that corporation which can make all property and rights, all states and people, and all liberty and hope its playthings in an hour and its victims forever. We are now this very day at war with a socialist communist conspiracy. This is a point that a lot of people do not seem to realize. They think that just because we are not shooting at each other with bullets, that it isn't a real war. But we are really at war, and we must win this war if we expect to survive as a free people. The following quotations from J. Edgar Hoover, probably the best authority on this subject in America, point this out very clearly. We are at war with the communists, and the sooner every red-blooded American realizes this, the safer we will be. We are living in an age of uncertainty, an age of awesome national peril, an age when the struggle between freedom and totalitarian enslavement is drawing toward a climax. The Communist Party USA has been and is engaging in an all-out war against American freedom. Its tactics of confusion, retreat, advance, infiltration, and hypocrisy are in full play. The attack is both legal and illegal, offensive and defensive, open and concealed. Yes, we are at war with this sinister conspiracy. Every communist today must be considered an enemy, wherever he may be, at home or abroad. A soft approach toward the menace of communism can lead only to national disaster. End of quotation. The communists are winning the war and building their empire largely with the help of non-communists, fellow travelers, sympathizers, dupes, liberals, and so on. Some people foolishly believe that the communists are changing, that they are mellowing. This is not true. Today's headlines remind us there has been no basic change in communist imperialism. The danger which world communism presents to the free nations has not abated. If anything, it has increased. In a masterful address, Keys to Freedom, before the Catholic Youth Organization last month, J. Edgar Hoover issued shocking and timely warnings to complacent Americans. I quote, "Today, the communists are engaged in an intensive campaign to control the minds and win the allegiance of American youth. Toward this end, a National Youth Commission has been established within the Communist Party USA. Special publications have been issued, front groups have been organized, and an ambitious speech program has been directed against our colleges and universities. It is indeed ironic that the Communist Party speakers, whose minds and thoughts and actions are in no manner free, should demand the opportunity to parrot the Moscow line to young Americans under the guise of academic freedom. Academic freedom is not an instrument for the perpetuation of conspiratorial ideologies, nor is it an agent of self-destruction, a freedom to destroy freedom. As a free-flowing channel of truth and knowledge, academic freedom is not obligated to carry along the silted tributaries of lies and distortions of known communists. The communists look upon students as potential sympathizers, supporters, and contributors to the party's cause, nor are they unmindful of the rich opportunity for infiltration presented by unwary racial and nationality groups. This is especially true, continues Hoover, of the intense civil rights movement within the United States. For America's 20 million Negroes and the countless other citizens who share their objectives in the current struggle are a priority target for communist propaganda and exploitation. Every organization engaged in this struggle must constantly remain alert to this vital fact, for once under communist domination, all freedoms and rights are lost. One of the dangerous present-day fallacies is the idea that we can continue with a policy of peaceful coexistence. Here again, Hoover warns as follows. Key to the new Soviet strategy is the so-called peaceful coexistence policy. It is a broad psychological tactic cleverly devised by Khrushchev to serve a number of objectives. It is another powerful weapon in the communist arsenal of deception, a weapon concealed behind an alluring campaign designed to provide a cover for the goal of attaining a worldwide communist society through revolutionary means. Through the weapon of peaceful coexistence, Soviet communists are seeking to lull the free world, particularly the United States, into a false sense of security. It is a means of buying time through which they can consolidate past gains while probing for soft spots in the non-communist world which present opportunities for future expansion. More is needed than merely to say that we are opposed to communism. We must aggressively take action to defeat it. It is the duty of all Americans to fully understand the true import of this threat to our heritage, to expose it, and to combat it with every weapon at our command. It is not enough to be against communism. We must shed our complacency and aggressively meet this challenge. As the Ward Teaching Message of July 1961 stated, quote, "It is the duty of freedom-loving people to oppose and resist this evil with all the strength God has given us. If we do not, we stand to lose all we and our forebears have gained through the centuries." The real threat is here at home. The seriousness of the insidious internal threat cannot be overemphasized. The communist threat from without must not blind us to the communist threat from within. The latter is reaching into the very heart of America through its espionage agents and a cunning, defiant, and lawless Communist Party which is fanatically dedicated to the Marxist cause of world enslavement and destruction of the foundations of our republic. The Communist Party in this country has attempted to infiltrate and subvert every segment of our society. Unjust criticism of the anti-communists, anti-socialists helps the conspiracy in this danger and is dangerous to our future. In April 1962, President David O. McKay, in his closing remarks at General Conference, quoted J. Edgar Hoover as follows: "There is no place here in America for part-time patriots. This nation is face to face with the greatest danger ever to confront it, a sinister and deadly conspiracy which can be conquered only by an alert, informed citizenry. It is indeed appalling that some members of our society continue to deplore and criticize those who stress the communist danger. Public indifference to this threat is tantamount to national suicide. Lethargy leads only to disaster," unquote. Yes, J. Edgar Hoover, probably the best informed man in America on this threatening conspiracy, has repeatedly warned us that the gravest danger we face today comes from the socialist communist conspiracy and from within. Many people cannot see how this statement of Mr. Hoover's can be true, since there are supposedly only about 10,000 or so party members in this country. Those who doubt Mr. Hoover overlook the fact that for every member of the communist conspiracy, there are at least 10 others willing and eager to do their bidding. In addition to this, the communists and their fellow travelers move toward key positions by which they can influence many others, just as iron filings move toward a magnet. Also, the communists at this stage do not themselves intend to do much of the actual close-in fighting. Instead, they make use of non-communists to serve their purposes. Their method of operation is to confuse the issues, divide one group against another, and thus to conquer. The communist method of confusing the issues is to use pseudo-idealistic and pseudo-moral words and phrases in order to trap the unwary into following their designs. The fisherman knows that he cannot entice a fish to bite upon a raw steel hook, so he dresses it up with a nice juicy worm and the poor fish bites. In the same manner, the pseudo-moral and pseudo-idealistic expressions trap many innocents so that they will follow out the aims of the communist conspirators. For example, the false appeals made by the communists in the name of peace and the brotherhood of man. They know full well that communism has nothing in common with these expressions as we understand them, yet they deliberately misuse them in order to deceive, and they are effective. If you want the terrifying facts about the communist use of the Negroes, I recommend Manning Johnson's book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense, a reprint by American Opinion magazine, Belmont 78, Massachusetts. The author, and this is a good example, the author, a Negro, was a communist for 10 years and served on the National Committee for the Communist Party here in America and assisted in the planning of the conspiracy against his own race. Let me pause a moment to point out some pro-communist propaganda which has been widely circulated. It is frequently stated that communism is on the extreme left and fascism is on the extreme right. This is absolutely false. It is true that communism is on the extreme left, but Nazism and fascism are so closely allied with communism that J. Edgar Hoover has called communism red fascism and Nazism black fascism. They are all forms of socialism. And as has been pointed out by well-informed people in the West, they are all forms of governmentism, where the government becomes lord and master, and we become serfs and slaves. The extreme right is composed of the anarchists who believe that people are so good at heart that no government at all is needed. Our forefathers knew that while most people try to do the right thing, there are a few who run amok. They therefore established our great constitutional republic, a government of limited powers. They believed that we must have some government, but it must be bound down by the chains of our Constitution, so that it will not slip farther and farther over into the realm of governmentism, whether it be communism, Nazism, fascism, welfare statism, or some other form of socialism. Please note the words of George Washington, who stated, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master." And at a later date, Woodrow Wilson said that the history of liberty is the history of limitations of government power, not the increase of it. And at a still later date, that great spiritual leader and patriot, President David O. McKay, said this: "During the first half of the 20th century, we have traveled far into the soul-destroying land of socialism." Now, I want to point out just a few of the ways in which America is tripping down the primrose path. Anyone who is interested and who would care to make a careful study of the subject will be both amazed and shocked at the progress made by the Marxian socialists in recent years. Their tremendous influence and power can be grasped if we will read the carefully documented book by Dan Smoot, a former FBI administrative supervisor and assistant to J. Edgar Hoover, entitled The Invisible Government. This book shows how the Fabians, operating through many influential organizations, have reached out their tentacles and are throttling free enterprise. At the same time, they are pyramiding and concentrating immense power in the federal government. In this way, the advance of communism is being comforted, aided, and abetted by those who are not members of the communist conspiracy, but who adhere to the same principles. Dr. Karu Hunt, a worldwide authority on communist strategy, states this: "Yet where the ends they seek are concerned, socialism and communism are virtually interchangeable terms, as anyone who consults the Oxford English Dictionary or any standard textbook will discover. Indeed, Lenin's party continued to call itself Social Democrat until the 7th Party Congress of March 1918, when it substituted the term Bolshevik as a protest against the non-revolutionary attitude of the socialist parties of the West." President J. Reuben Clark expressed his conviction on this point in these significant words, quote, "The paths we are following, if we move forward thereon, will inevitably lead us to socialism or communism. And these two are as like as two peas in a pod in their ultimate effect upon our liberties. And never forget for one moment that communism and socialism are state slavery. World conquest has been, is now, and ever will be its ultimate goal." The communists and fellow travelers have never deviated from this objective. Despite the high-pressure campaign they have insidiously directed behind Khrushchev's phrase of peaceful coexistence, the communists know that this is simply a propaganda slogan. It is devised to further their own ends by stirring the hopes and emotions of those who seek an end to the turmoil, fear, and sorrow that world communism itself has created. Actions continue to speak louder than words, and certainly the communists have shown no indication of a sincere quest for peace. Here are a few examples. There are many. The takeover of Cuba and the establishment of a communist base and island fortress in the heart of America. I have been there. The ever-constant infiltration of red fascists into countries of Central and South America to create a Sovietized Latin America. I wish you could hear the testimony of men like Senator Eastland, chairman of the Senate Internal Security Committee, as he unburdened his heart to me regarding the threat, far beyond anything that has been reported, from what's happening in Cuba and the infiltration that's going on into many other Latin American countries. The increase of espionage activities by Soviet and satellite agents in our own country, particularly those who strive to penetrate our government processes from protection afforded them by diplomatic assignments in New York, in the United Nations, and in Washington, D.C. The frantic efforts of the Communist Party USA to subvert our youth, and the intense drive of the communists operating from concealed positions to wrest control of the movement for Negro rights. Does all this indicate a real and sincere desire to live in peaceful coexistence? To the socialist communist conspiracy, there is no such thing as peaceful coexistence, except as a tool for further conquest. Their stated objective is to bury us. Since about the time of Woodrow Wilson, Fabian socialists have been able to cuddle close to key people in our government and those who exercise influence. I will not take time to trace their activities, although it could be done very easily, through the various administrations since Wilson's time. I will be content to give you 2 or 3 examples approximating that of the Fabian socialists. It may shock you to learn that the first communist cell in government, so far as we know, was organized in the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the early 30s. John Apt was there. It was John Apt whom Oswald, the accused assassin of the President Kennedy, requested for his attorney when he was confronted with that question a few days ago. Harry Dexter White was there and later became Undersecretary of the Treasury. Lee Pressman was there, and Alger Hiss, who was advisor to President Franklin D. Roosevelt at Yalta and Tehran, and who was the principal architect and the first Secretary General of the United Nations organizing meetings, was also there. Today, Walt Whitman Rostow, who is chief planner for the State Department, has expressed a dangerous point of view somewhat like this: we must do everything in our power to avoid irritating and antagonizing the communists. They are, after all, merely rough and crude socialists, and we must avoid doing anything that would escalate into a war. In fact, what we should do is to help them to develop so they will mature and outgrow their violent impulses. In this way, the communists will move somewhat over in our direction. At the same time, we must move our country over toward the left, with more and more socialism until ultimately the two will merge. Each country will then give up its armaments and armed forces and place them in the hands of a one-world government. That would be amusing if it weren't so serious. It's very, very real. And Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., former professor of history at Harvard and now high on the councils of our government, has said this: there seems no inherent obstacle to the gradual advance of socialism in the United States through a series of new deals. And that socialism appears quite practical as a long-time proposition. In either case, the whole tendency is toward more and more governmentism, more and more centralization, and less individual responsibility and freedom. The threat is very real. An interesting example of the socialist mind at work is the present so-called Civil Rights Bill of 1963. I'm going to quote just a few lines from a talk made by John C. Satterfield, past president of the American Bar Association, over the Mannion Forum weekly broadcast, September 15, 1963. He said, "It is clothed in the name of civil rights, and it is called the Civil Rights Act of 1963. As a matter of fact, it is 10% civil rights and 90% extension of federal executive power at the expense of individuals, states, municipalities, in fact, at the expense of everyone." And from my careful study of the Act, I agree with Mr. Satterfield. With reference to the United Nations and spurious appendages, I would like to quote the Internal Security Report for 1956, page 213, as made by the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee as follows. What appears on the surface, at least, to be by far the worst danger spot from the standpoint of disloyalty and subversion activity among Americans employed by international organizations is UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Then in the footnote of this same annual report, we read this: information in the possession of the subcommittee indicating a great deal of evidence not yet publicly adduced points to the possibility that the parent body, the United Nations, may be the worst spot of all. There is no indication that there has been the slightest improvement in the United Nations or its satellites since that time. I have in my possession a copy of an unpublished manuscript on the United Nations Charter, prepared in 1945 and given to me by that eminent international lawyer and former Under Secretary of State, J. Reuben Clark. President Clark's declarations on this, as on other subjects, emphasize more and more with the passing of time his vision and statesmanship. Commenting on the United Nations Charter and the travesty on exhaustive consideration, as the Charter was hastily approved by the Congress under urging from the State Department, he continues with a devastating analysis and a sober warning to the American people that there will be a day of reckoning. I believe that day is near at hand. The hopes and aspirations of the people have been betrayed. I hope this scholarly, unpublished memorandum by President Clark, with its penetrating analysis, will someday soon be available in full. Meantime, I urge all to read that solid volume, Stand Fast by the Constitution, which embodies much of President Clark's timely instruction. Meantime, let's have no further blind devotion to the communist-dominated United Nations. The open and covert management of the news in this country is another case, frightening in its implications. One high government official has made the appalling statement to the effect that it is all right for the government to lie to the people if it serves the government's purpose to lie. Certainly lies can take place by omission as well as by commission. Constantine Brown, in an article in a recent issue of the Congressional Record, told of prominent people who had defected from communism, who now fear they have joined the losing side. They gave two reasons. First, communism will win because Western leaders, particularly in the United States, do not want to believe that the Soviets are planning to conquer the world. And second, Khrushchev knows that the United States will offer only token opposition to the Soviets' plan to conquer in Latin America. This morning, when most people should be asleep, I drafted these words, which I give to you, my young brothers and sisters particularly, from my heart. The question arises, what can we do to preserve our Constitution? And how can we avoid being misled into doing those things that will actually help to destroy it? During last October conference, I spoke on the subject, "Be not deceived." I said there were 3 keys one could use to avoid deception. First, the Scriptures. Second, the words of the prophets, especially the prophet, the president of the church, and particularly the living one. And third, the Holy Ghost. Now, the Scriptures tell us about the war in heaven over free agency, similar to the war we're going through now, where the devil's program was guaranteed security as opposed to the Lord's program of letting each choose for himself, even if he makes the wrong choice. Once you understand these Scriptures, you'll understand why the presidents of the church have opposed communism, socialism, and the welfare state. And you see why you must oppose them too, if you're in harmony with the word of the Lord. The Scriptures also tell about our inspired Constitution. If you accept these Scriptures, you'll automatically reject the counsel of men like Senator Fulbright and others who depreciate our Constitution. If you use the Scriptures as a guide, you know what the Book of Mormon has to say regarding murderous conspiracies in the last day and how we're to awake to the awful situation today. I find certain elements in the church do not like to see the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants so much. It has too much to say about freedom. The second criteria is the prophets, especially the living prophet, the living president of the church. Do you realize what President McKay has said about some recent decisions of our Supreme Court? Do you realize that he has called communism the greatest threat to the church today and has said that this country has traveled far into the soul-destroying land of socialism? He has opposed programs of federal aid to education. He has supported right-to-work laws. Are you in harmony with the prophet's declaration? If you accept the Scriptures and the prophets, then you will automatically separate yourself from the philosophy of some Mormons, and you have to part with a number of our national leaders and their programs. The last criteria is the Holy Ghost, the test of the Spirit. You can't use that test unless you have the Spirit of the Lord with you. And that only comes through righteous living, which means being in harmony with church doctrine, in addition to simply being active in church work and attending meetings. So there are the 3 main keys. Apply them and you'll avoid pitfalls and traps which use members of the church and some teachers may set for you. President Joseph F. Smith said that one of the 3 things that plagued the church within was false educational ideas. And I'm sure you'll be introduced to some of these ideas somewhere along your path, particularly as you leave and go into graduate study abroad. Using the Scriptures and the prophets and the Spirit as a guide, we can eliminate a lot of the deceptions and false philosophies and cure-alls of men and discern between the wheat and the chaff. Thus, with the Scripture and the words of the prophets for a guide, it's either to select our reading, for we need information out of the best books to help us in this fight for our freedom. And when it comes to the writings of men, in addition to the tests we've suggested, it's helpful to select the men who have proved most accurate over the years. On this basis, may I suggest to you my own personal recommendation of some reading which will help you in the fight to save our Constitution. First, for a number of years, President J. Reuben Clark served on the Board of Trustees of the Foundation for Economic Education while he was a member of the First Presidency. President Clark, as you probably know, was an Undersecretary of State and Ambassador to Mexico. He wrote the famous memoranda on the Monroe Doctrine, the finest thing of its kind. In 1923, he warned us in the Salt Lake Tabernacle of the communist socialist menace and what it was going to do, and he was right. No one in the church has shown greater insight regarding our Constitution and the socialist communist threat to it. The Foundation for Economic Education, with which he served, puts out some of the most enlightening freedom literature available. They also put out a free monthly magazine entitled The Freeman, which is excellent. They will be happy to send you a free catalog in their literature. May I mention some of the books which they distribute? There are many others. The Federalist, written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, three of our inspired founding fathers, explaining why the need of a Constitution. The Constitution of the United States by Massati, The Cliches of Socialism, The Mainspring of Human Progress by Weaver, Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt, and The Admiral's Log by Admiral Ben Morrell, which book is also on the MIA reading course list this year. The address for the Foundation for Economic Education is simply Irvington-on-Hudson, New York. These books and others will show you what America stands for, our free enterprise system, our constitutional republic, how we became the world's greatest power. For first, you need to know what America stands for before you can realize what could be a threat to it. For as President McKay has said, the fostering of full economic freedom lies at the base of all of our liberties. The next thing we should know is about the major enemy to our way of life, socialistic communism. In October Conference 1959, President McKay admonished us to read what he called an excellent book, The Naked Communists. I agree with the President of the Church. Probably no man in America knows the internal communist threat better than J. Edgar Hoover. His two books on communism should be must-reading. They are Masters of Deceit and A Study of Communism. You Can Trust the Communists by Dr. Fred Swartz, whom President McKay called a true friend of freedom, is also an enlightening book. Of course, there are others. The House Committee on Un-American Activities and the Senate Internal Security Committee have both put out instructive information, and a list of their publications is available free of charge from the U.S. Superintendent of Documents, Washington 25, D.C. Once you get the facts about our American constitutional republic and the threats to it, then you're going to want to do something. Certainly those who are organized and have a plan and are dedicated, though they be few, will always defeat the many who are not organized and have no plan or dedication. The communists have proved this, and the fighters for freedom must realize it too. If then you want to have impact through an organization, make sure that organization squares with the Scriptures and the prophets and the Spirit. Then move forward and use your free agency to accomplish that which is virtuous and praiseworthy, and let the devil and his agents and dupes howl. In this time of deadly peril, we must choose men and women to represent us in our government who have attained an inner attunement of mind, heart, and soul with God. Only these people have anchors firmly rooted and strong enough to withstand the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. They only have the inner sense of direction, stability of spirit, and firmness of character essential to our survival. We must not place in positions of trust cheap opportunists who will sell their souls for a mess of pottage. Rather, we must place in public office men and women who place the love of God first in their lives and who, as a consequence, can serve their fellow men with true wisdom. Not cheap politicians, but statesmen are needed today. Not opportunists, but men and women of principle must be demanded by the people. In this time of great stress and danger, we must place only those dedicated to the preservation of our Constitution, our American Republic, and responsible freedom under God. O God, give us men with a mandate higher than the ballot box. In closing, let me quote Bishop Exeter. Give us men, strong and stalwart ones, men whom the highest hope inspires, men whom purest honor fires, men who trample self beneath them, men who make their country wreath them as her noble sons, men who never shame their mothers, men who never fail their brothers, true however false are others. Give us men, I say again, give us men. Give us men, men who when the tempest gathers, grasp the standard of their fathers in the thickest fight, men who strike for home and altar. Let the coward cringe and falter, God defend the right. True as truth, though lorn and lonely, tender as the brave are only, men who tread where saints have trod, men for country, home, and God. Give us men. I say again, give us men. God bless you, my brothers and sisters. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.